there it goes.
There you go.
There you go. Okay, thank you. Okay, well, welcome everyone to the August 13th Planning Commission hearing for the City of Littleton. Can I start out with a roll call, Doreen?
Commissioner Bagnall.
Present.
Commissioner Coronado.
Here.
Commissioner Duzen.
Here.
Commissioner Elrod. Commissioner Graham.
Here.
Commissioner Metcalf.
Here.
Commissioner Ranville.
Here.
Commissioner Rudnicki.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Doreen. You should all have a copy of the agenda. Do I have any changes to the agenda tonight? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from June 11th, 2012. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes?
I just have one thing.
Okay.
There's comments in here about the HPB liaison, and which is fine, but the liaison has been eliminated, so I don't do that anymore, and I'd just suggest we remove that from the minutes in the future.
Thank you, Matt. I do believe it was removed from the agenda for this meeting, but it was still showing up in the minutes of the past meeting, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments on the agenda? Do you have a motion to approve?
I move we approve the minutes.
Second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? That be 6-4, none against?
We're going to move Andrew up.
Yeah, since Commissioner Elrod's not here, Andrew, perhaps you could come up. I haven't heard whether she's going to make it or not, but...
Up there.
Okay, the next... Sure, go ahead.
We're sitting opposite as our names are on the board. So we need to switch our names. If you want to do that, or we'll get straight. Thanks. Really?
Okay. Next on the agenda, we have scheduled and unscheduled appearances. Anybody that's not directly involved with the public hearing, which will be the next item, feel free to raise your hand, come forward if there's anything to be discussed. Seeing none, we'll move on to the public hearing.
Commissioner Elrod, I need to recuse myself from this discussion and voting because I have an interest in the property. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Matt.
I would say that I have a daughter that has attended there, but it does not influence my vote.
Okay. Okay, so with that, we will begin the public hearing. Ernie Rose.
Good evening, Commissioners. Ernie Rose, Senior Planner, Community Development. I'm here to present the Family Taekwondo Conditional Use Permit. I'd like to start by submitting a list of exhibits.
Commissioner Bagnall, I think it would be best if you actually sat down at the table so that we're not inclined to engage in the discussion on this one. Thank you.
Okay. There's nobody signed up.
You have to move. Right. Karina's here.
Oh, okay.
Matt recused.
Okay.
Go there, or do I go there?
Andrew, I think you better go down there. Karina, come up here.
This is going to get really confusing. There's a lot of movement going on. Are you Karina or are you? Jenny? Anybody else want to move?
Or change
Should I
the
read
name?
these off, these exhibits, or should I list these, or?
I'll read them off to you.
Okay.
So the list of exhibits for case number CDU 12-001 are as follows. Exhibit A, city staff report and attachments. Exhibit B, application and attachments. Exhibit C, area reference map. Exhibit D, city zoning map city zoning ordinance by reference. Exhibit E, official zoning map by reference. Exhibit F, proof of posting. Exhibit G, proof of publication. And Exhibit H, public hearing roster. Family Taekwondo Center of Littleton requests approval of a conditional use permit that will allow for continued operation of a martial arts studio located at 5770 South Bemis Street. The property is zoned R3, and which is single-family residential. Can we have the overhead on, please? Well, outside of that, oh, there we go. I guess that's good enough. The properties that surround the property are zoned R3, which is single-family residential, and the property to the south is zoned OS, which is Stern Park. The policy question tonight is, does the proposed conditional use application meet the conditions established for non-residential uses permitted in a residential zone district? A little background on the property. The church was built in 1959, and in 1959, the city directories listed the property as Jehovah's Witness Gospel Hall. The church was active till 1998 when the current owner purchased the property. Family Taekwondo has operated a martial arts studio in this building for 14 years. Martial arts is taught to an estimated 75 students. The class sizes are between 8 and 10 on average. 3 classes are held daily between 3 p.m. and 7 p.m., and there's 2 weekend classes that are held between 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. The property is accessed from the public alley located in the rear, and there are 12 on-site parking spaces. In 2011, the Planning Commission reviewed an ordinance that allowed this type of use or a limited number of non-residential uses such as martial arts studios and existing non-residential buildings as a conditional use. The Commission recommended against the proposed ordinance. However, in November of that year, the City Council adopted the ordinance. Tonight, we're here to consider the conditional use to formalize the operation of the karate or the taekwondo studio. Under the staff analysis, in a summary of the staff's comments, the application under consideration complies with the applicable provisions of this title and the specific code related to non-residential uses in residential zone districts. The martial arts studio has proven to be compatible with adjacent residential neighborhood. The studio provides a desirable service to the neighborhood and the community. There are no proposed alterations to the site or to the structure. The specific performance requirements related to non-residential uses in residential zone districts are being met in that the use is being conducted in a non-residential structure on a site with an adequate number of parking spaces. The hours of operation and the small class sizes minimize the traffic and parking impacts on the adjacent public streets. The existing light fixtures comply with the current code, and the property does not have any signage. The comprehensive plan discourages encroachment of commercial land uses into residential districts. However, the Ordinance 24, Series of 2011, when adopted, determined that martial arts studios are similar to other non-residential uses such as churches, private schools, and child care centers, which are allowed in residential zone districts. Therefore, this is now permitted in those residential zone districts, provided they meet the conditions. The community-wide comprehensive plan includes a goal related to the preservation of the city's unique identity by protecting historic structures, This building was included in the survey in 2000 and 2001. When the survey was conducted, the building was not old enough to achieve any historical significance. However, the survey recognized the building's design as reflective of modern style influences and recommended further research to find the building's architect. The reuse of this building, the reuse of this building in its present form meets the goal. Staff believes the family taekwondo conditional application meets the conditions established for non-residential uses permitted in residential zone districts. Therefore, staff recommends approval of the conditional use for family taekwondo. And with that, I'll take any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rose. Is there any questions? I'll go ahead. Go ahead, Dave.
Ernie, the site plan submitted by the applicant shows and says that there are 14 parking spaces on site. I think there's a minor discrepancy there. We're saying 12 in the staff report. But the applicant's plan also says 8 spaces are required. It didn't cite anything for that. So what's the basis for this conditional use in this zoning? How many spaces per how many square feet?
Well, it's basically, as it says in your staff report, it's 1 space per 200. There is no specific parking requirement for a taekwondo studio, so you use a similar use. Like for retail, it would be 1 space per 200. So.
But the zoning that this is similar to, either private schools or child care or churches, what are the requirements there?
Well, the churches are based on the assembly area.
Okay.
And child care centers, I'm not quite sure. Based on the number of teachers is the child care centers.
So what we're saying is the new ordinance we adopted last year really didn't get into the specifics about what minimum parking on site was required.
Right.
So we're having to make it up as we go.
Well, yes. Well, I mean,
it's an honest answer.
It's
I appreciate
not really making it up. We just don't have any other parking requirement to compare it to. So with 8 to 10 students in it, it's enough parking. So.
I'll just try to answer that. The code doesn't specify every use there is out there for a parking requirement. So it does allow for obtaining information from an applicant that has a particular use. It's not in that the 2 pages of uses that are listed in the parking requirements. And in a case like this, we usually ask the applicant what do they find their needs are for parking, that instead of identifying every single use in the world in the code for parking requirements, that's what we do. And in this case, they've identified to us what their experience is, the number of parking spaces they need. I believe in Ernie's staff report, he used the retail as an example because that's actually one of our most highest requirements of parking is with retail. So I believe he was using that as a comparison just to show that they do in fact meet a retail use, if that was the type of use they had. So.
No, it just seems to me it was an oversight when we adopted the ordinance. We should have come up with an objective criterion for that. Maybe it's something staff want to look at, go back and adjust so we're not doing it as a subjective, well, that looks about right. It's kind of hard to do, say, claim predictability and equity when it's evaluated that way.
Follow up on that. I think the conditional use then will, one of the conditions will be that there is maintained 8 parking spaces.
Correct.
Minimum 8, based on the analysis that's in here. There was one other question I had, too. It appears that there's 14 shown on the plan. There's 12 in the staff report, but there's only 8 on the actual property itself because the property line runs on sort of a diagonal through there. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the rest of it is on city property?
Right.
But they have access to it, from what I understand.
Yes, they're allowed to use those. He had a letter in his comments in the packet. They've been historically used for them, and the park uses them, I believe.
If for some reason that was to go away for some unforeseen reason, does that can it be included in the conditional use that they have to maintain that number of spaces or that access? Or
Well, you can make it a condition, but it is already a condition that they have the 8 spaces in the, and it's not likely they wouldn't, but yeah.
Are they giving you any credit for street parking?
No.
No credit?
Any other questions for Ernie? I noticed that nobody has signed up to speak. Would the applicant like to speak, to add anything?
They're here
to
if you
this?
have any questions. They do not have a formal presentation, but they are here if you have any questions for them.
Okay. Are there any questions for the applicant? And since nobody has signed up, and I see other people coming in, I'll leave it open as an opportunity for anybody to speak on behalf of, in support of the application or against it. Feel free to speak up. If not, I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Do we have a first?
I move we close the public hearing.
Okay. In order. All in favor? Okay. Thank you. The public hearing is now closed. Do I have a motion on the application?
I move that the Planning Commission Resolution Number 12-03 for the Family Taekwondo 5770 South Bemis Street be approved with the following conditions. The use is conducted within a non-residential structure that was constructed for a church or school. The use and site shall comply with off-street parking requirements. Exterior lighting shall be fully shielded and comply with the requirements of Chapter 15 of this title in order to mitigate negative impacts to the surrounding residential properties. 4, adjacent public streets shall have adequate capacity to safely carry any additional vehicular traffic which may be generated by the use. And 5, all signage must comply.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I second.
Okay. Now we're open to discussion. Who would like to begin? I guess I would like to start by saying thank you for putting together a very comprehensive application here. I think we have everything we need to discuss this, so thank you. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
I've got a couple. Obviously, it complies with the ordinance because this is why the ordinance was written. I'm a little concerned that one of the arguments made in proposing the ordinance in the first place and then getting it adopted over the Planning Commission's vote was that, gee, it's not going to add anything more to the residential neighborhood in the way of traffic. Well, of course not. It's been operating in violation of zoning for 14 years. In addition, we're now allowing them to get by with less than the required 50% unobstructed open space, I guess on the argument that they're grandfathered, even though the conditional use being considered wasn't allowed either when the site was initially developed or when the building was converted to the unallowed use. I'm a little surprised that we're letting them get away with, and that is getting away with that. We wouldn't and haven't allowed other people.
Commissioners, can I redirect you for a second here? We need to be looking at the criteria that's listed and not...
And I'm doing that.
Just a minute, and not why the ordinance was or was not being adopted by council. That is irrelevant to the hearing.
Irrelevant to the hearing. Well, in that case, between that and City Council's being able to rewrite or redefine terms from the comprehensive plan, which plainly said that commercial use shouldn't be allowed to enter into the residential zones, then there's really nothing more to say. It complies with the ordinance, for better or worse. Okay.
Any other discussion for or against? I have to say, on my evaluation, I do believe it meets with the spirit of the ordinance, and the concerns that I would have, first of all, any neighborhood complaints, issues with operations over the years, and there have been a number of years where this has been operating. Concerns about hours of operation, access and parking, signs and lighting, and those types of things have all been addressed to my satisfaction. I think it's an appropriate adaptive reuse. If it was a new use in the neighborhood, it probably wouldn't have been accepted. But as a non-conforming use, to me, it seems appropriate, and I'm going to vote for it.
Call the question.
Any further discussion? Call the question. Okay. The motion's on the table. Do I need to read it again?
No.
No? Okay. All in favor? Okay. The motion has passed. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next agenda item. General business. Ordinance of the City of Littleton amending Titles 10 and 11 of the City Code concerning the DRC, Development Review Committee. Who's going to make that presentation? Glenn? Dan?
Good evening, Commission. I'm not going to be too long-winded on this because we've spent 2 study sessions over it, so I think you all know what this is. And but this time I had to actually put it in the fun-to-read formal ordinance form. I did do the lines, and I tried to refer to some page numbers lines for your ease of reference in some of these. What I will do is I'll just briefly go over the points that I described in the latter part of my staff report, just as you all had read, just to point out what how I addressed in the code some of the questions and suggestions that you'd had at your study sessions. And then if you have any questions regarding those, or if I missed something, please let me know. As you probably read in your staff report, I did decide to go ahead and remove the staff's proposal to delete the SDP and mobile home districts. There was some concern expressed regarding that, and so those 2 zone districts are back in the zoning code, and for future evaluation, we may look at that again and do a little further study on it and bring that back to you at a later date. At this point, any references to removing them from the code have all been deleted, and it's back in the code. So the ordinance in front of you does not remove those 2 districts. I had some concerns regarding the sketch plan requirements in that they seem to be quite comprehensive, like a site development plan, and we at the study session had explained to you that since all these developments that do come in, some are a little bit more minor than others, and all that list of information that I had in the operating standards for a sketch plan may not be necessarily applicable for each project that comes in. So in the operating standards, I'd put a little explanation at the beginning of the checklist trying to give a customer an example as to why certain cases would require more information than another based on the scope of their project. Then I, under the concern about the requirement for licensed landscape architect, I did leave that requirement in. That is a state law requirement. The city attorney's opinion was that we needed to comply with that state law. I did put an exception in there, though, for minor modifications where the city's landscape architect, who is a licensed landscape architect, could take a look at a minor modification or a smaller project that just involved a small amount of landscaping. And that would hopefully relieve the burden for some folks that were doing a small project. And frankly, honestly, to tell you the truth, Dave Flagg, our landscape architect and arborist, he's really very good at working with people, and he's done a lot of that just anyway, you know. So let's see. And then the next concern I think was expressed was I did, it's on page 25, line 26 of the attached ordinance. I went back into the section. This was actually the section of landscape code that had to deal with drainage areas. And I did put reference back in, that the city arborist could make changes with sizes and quantities and locations in accordance with the landscape manual that we have. As a suggestion by the commissioners a long time ago, and we had received on June 11th a time extension request for conditional use, you'd asked staff to consider doing that administratively. And so we've talked about that, and I think there was some discussion last study session about, you know, in the case staff could do it if there's a construction issue involved like there was with this last extension that you all saw. My proposal here actually is to, you know, you were asking to clarify, which conditional use time extension requests would go to planning commission and which would go to staff. And honestly, to tell you the truth, we haven't had, this was probably, I think, the first time extension request we ever had in all the time I've been here. And we have so many different kinds of conditional uses, and there's so many different kinds of reasons somebody would want a time extension. I just had a real hard time trying to, okay. So I tried to simplify it a little bit, and this was my proposal, was that that the first year somebody needed a time extension, the staff could grant that. And then if there's additional time needed after that first year of time extension, then that would go to planning commission. So the total amount of time, because the applicant has a year to get his conditional use operating after its approval, they'd have 1 year to get their use operating. If they couldn't meet that 1 year and they needed a time extension, they could request that of staff. Staff could give an additional year to them. And then if for some reason they needed more than 2 years, and that would be a pretty, unusual circumstance, I think, then they would have that opportunity to go to planning commission to ask for that basically the third year to get themselves going. And anyway, so that was my proposal on how to handle that issue. In number 6 here, we talked about the timeline for recording plans and time extensions and all. Staff had moved that out of the code and put it in the operating standards, and you had all recommended strongly about putting that back into the code again. So I did move that language back into the code. It's actually in both places. I repeat a lot of stuff in the operating standards so that people certainly have a complete package of information when they get it. But I did put the recording requirements and timelines back into the code, and I added section F below that section with the recording plans that gives, if an applicant needs a 1 year additional time to get his plan signed and recorded, that could actually be granted to them administratively for 1 year, so that they're not having to necessarily take that plat back to council or go through that whole process again if they're a little bit short. And just from my own personal experience, I've seen some cases where, because of the economy, because of at the time financing was difficult to get, and especially with plats, there was absolutely a final plat, there was no provision for any kind of time extension. It had to be recorded within that year or it was gone, and ran into that many times for a few cases in the last 5 years because of the financing situation and getting letters of credit from banks and that sort of thing. So I think that having that administrative option of getting at least a 1 year time extension, I think, is helpful for folks. The other thing we were proposing in the code was to, the use, well, for instance, the Planning Commission, of course, they review appeals for site development plan approvals or denials. And the code originally, right, currently now gives it a 90 days for that appeal request to be put on the agenda. And then we're proposing that PDOs well, that's already been changed. PDO appeals go to city council instead of district court. So this code also further follows that with taking conditional use appeals to council rather than district court. Which all that, I believe, serves better customer service, because taking something to district court is costly and time-consuming for any property owner. What I did do at your request, you wanted to shorten up those timelines for appeals and be consistent. And so what I did is I took the things that go to Planning Commission under appeal, like the site plan, I changed that from 90 days to 30 days. For the two things that go to council, I shortened that from 90 days. I shortened it to 60 days rather than 30 days, just because, you know, council's agenda is usually pretty full, and I don't have a lot of, I mean, staff doesn't always have a lot of control over when something can get scheduled for them. So, I mean, certainly something can go on there sooner if it can, but the 60 days gives you that cushion for council. I also put in there a provision, because actually the last time you guys had an appeal, I think it was with the Jiffy Lube people on their building colors, they had their own personal reasons why they could not get onto the agenda at the time scheduled of the 90 days. They had their own issues, so I wanted to give the applicant the opportunity to also ask for a longer time period if their schedule needed it. However, I don't want it to go on and end it, and I have the situation resolved. So I put a maximum time limit of 90 days if that was requested by the applicant. There was some discussion about application requirements in the code versus application requirements in the operating standards, and I believe the final decision by everybody at the study session was to keep all the ownership type related documents in the code and then put everything else in the operating standards. So that's what I attempted to do there for both the all the zoning type applications and then in the subdivision regulations for the platting applications. One of the paragraphs in the subdivision regulations read a little harsh. I mean, it did say failure to provide said information may cause the application to be rejected and returned to the applicant. And in the spirit of being a little friendlier, I actually revised that language to really actually reflect what we do practice. You know, we don't sit there and take the plans and go, okay, you're missing these two things, and throw them back in their face and say it's rejected. We don't do that. So I actually just included language that said an incomplete application materials may cause delays in the review process. Just hopefully that's a little friendlier. And then we did make the change in the language for the lighting code regarding modifications that the Director of Community Development may authorize. And I moved those parts of the sentence around to say that if a modification meets the intent of this chapter, the director may approve the modification. And then, of course, we'd moved all the public notice requirements and the operating standards, including the 10-day requirement. And I think you all had a concern about the 10-day specification not being in the code. So I moved that all back in the code. And that's my summary of what I heard was your concerns at the last two study sessions. And other than that, I recommend approval of the ordinance that's in front of you, and hopefully be moving that forward to council in the next week or two. So, if you have any questions, or if I've missed something that you remembered being an issue that needed to be resolved, please let me know.
Okay. Thank you, Jan. Are there any questions?
I have a couple of questions,
Rena.
or just clarification on understanding. On page 3, Jan?
On the staff report? Okay. Let me get there.
So under time extensions, the second paragraph, so under conditional use, you said that we can grant an additional year through planning commission approval. So that's only for conditional use and does not apply for PDOs, PDs, SDPs, and subdivision plots. Am I understanding that correctly?
Actually, what I did, actually, the code, what I did propose was that on conditional use, staff can do a year approval, and then if they need a second approval, it would go to you all. Now, for all other things, the subdivision plats and the PDOs, staff can grant a one-year time extension on those if requested. It doesn't really limit that, but
So let me ask it a different way. So for the PDOs and PD plans, you can have a maximum of 2 years?
well, they get
Versus
one
conditional-
year. Yeah, that would be
Right.
2 years. You're right.
Versus conditional use, you can have the max
I
of 3 years.
proposed at 3, but
And is there a reason why one would have more time than another?
no.
Okay.
No. If that's something you feel that you want consistency in and give the applicant, I mean, I can, if that's something you suggest for a change, I could certainly do that.
I would
can
think
honestly
so.
say I've been through this so many
Yeah,
times. It's
not just
kinda-
for consistency purposes, but I think 3 years is reasonable, and I think it can apply to either situation.
Well, I didn't put in the language I had for time extensions period for staff approving. I didn't put a limit in there. It just says that, 1 year time extension may be granted administratively. I didn't put that, for no more than 2 years or something like that. I mean, because we have some language in the current code where you like DRC, for instance, can grant a 6-month extension, but no more than 2 times, We have some of that language in the code now.
So are you saying that for the PDOs and PD plans, so this first section, staff can approve it for 1 year and then they can approve it for another year? So you're saying there's no limit?
Yeah, let me find that in here.
Jan, is that 1019E?
Yeah.
Because all I see is an extension of approval for no more than 1 year may be
Year
granted by
may
the
be
Director of
granted by
Community
the-
Development.
Oh, okay, no more than 1 year.
That's on page 9.
Seems to me that there should be some time limit. You can't just keep granting extensions forever.
Yeah, see, no more than 1 year. It certainly can, if you want me to put something like that in there, like no more than 1 year with no more than 2.
I don't think that's necessary. I think the way it's worded makes that statement.
For 1019 too?
Because Dave just said, wait, where's the language on 10?
It's about line 8 on page 9 of 59
I'm not looking at the right thing. Hold on.
in the ordinance.
Oh, in the ordinance
provision.
here. Sorry.
So to clarify, currently, there's a 1-year time frame, so we'd be allowing the opportunity to extend it for not more than 1 additional year, correct?
Right.
So it is being extended.
What I'm recommending is that we allow for another year by approval by Planning Commission.
So by application to Planning Commission.
Oh, okay, so like 1 year administrative time extension, and then if they need a second year, it goes to
Planning
Planning
Commission.
Yeah,
Commission?
she's suggesting we make it consistent with what we're doing for conditional uses.
Okay,
And then
and that would be for PDOs.
would be for PDOs, PD plans, SDPs, and subdivision plats.
PDPs and subdivision plats, actually, they end up at city council for final approval.
For extension?
No,
Oh, they don't even go through us.
they
is
don't
what
even
you're saying.
have, right now, under the current code, they don't even have a time extension. So, I don't know.
What I'm trying to accomplish is that if we are allowing for 3 years under conditional use, we should allow for 3 years for the PDOs, PD plans, SDPs, and subdivision plats.
Okay.
I think your point is it goes through a different review process or approval process.
Yeah, so for instance, let's say like the approval process that you're the final approval on, the PDO and the the conditional uses would be 1 year staff, and then the second year would be, which would be 3 years total, planning commission. And then what I'm thinking, then like the rezonings, the PD plans, and the plats that actually end up in front of council, that they would be given opportunity to go to a time extension to council.
Yeah.
I think some of the confusion here is because the way the revised ordinance is written, it lumps together all general PD plans, PDO plans, final PD plans, and final SDPs, and then doesn't differentiate when it's talking about the time extensions. It lumps them all together. We may want to separate those if that's the intent.
Oh, here you go, Jan.
Okay, so in this section, I could separate that to decipher between the three.
Yeah, it's just E on recording where it mentions all four of the types of the documents, and then F on where it talks about time extension. It doesn't separate. I mean,
Right.
one flows into the other. Okay.
And I had another question.
Okay.
Go ahead.
On page 3 again, where you talk about Chapter 7, Title 10. This has become an issue in cases where an SDP is required because of a change in use, which results in a change in parking requirements. So you give an example that it would require less parking, and so in that case, it seems obvious that that can be approved. But does this also apply if a change in use requires additional parking? How would we treat that?
It would still, let me find the language I put in here. Chapter 7. I modified the applicability requirements for site plans so that it basically kind of speaks to physical, requirements that would require physical changes in the property. And so what I did is I replaced one of the applicability requirements existing is this parking thing. So it seems kind of silly when somebody's actually putting a use in that doesn't require as many parking spaces that they're having to come in and go through that whole ordeal of doing a site plan approval. So I changed the applicability requirements for site plan to apply for cases where there's construction of a new principal structure. I have those written on page 28 of the ordinance. If you want to follow along, it starts down at about line 15, where approval of a final site development plan shall be required for commercial, industrial, and multiple family residential development if one or more of the following are proposed to occur on the site. 1, the construction of a new principal structure would require a site development plan process. We have that now. 2, in order to replace some of these other sort of funny criteria we have now, I've proposed that a site plan would be required if the construction of a building addition, accessory structure, or additional surface parking and or other paved or concrete surface resulting in significant impacts which may include but not be limited to drainage, parking, traffic, and landscaping. That should cover that. Okay. Because we've had a situation. I can use another example downtown because Jake's Brew Bar is an example. They had a change of use, and their change in use required more parking, but because they're downtown in the CA district, they can get off-site. They can meet their on-site parking requirements by negotiating shared off-site parking somewhere. Okay, that's allowed in the code. Well, okay. Well, technically, though, according to our code, they should go through site plan approval because they're getting a change of use that increases their parking requirements. However, they're going to meet that by another provision that they're allowed, and that's by sharing off-site parking somewhere else. So they were not physically doing anything different to their property, but under our code, they would be required to go through site plan approval, which doesn't make sense because they're not really doing anything to their property. I mean, that was another example we came across that made us go, okay, this is not making sense. We need to do something. We need to fix this. And that's what I was trying to cover in this proposed changes. So.
That makes sense. Okay. All I had.
Good.
Kurt? Craig, I have a procedural question. Should we not have a proposed motion on the floor and then make some amendments to that? Because Karina, we would want to add what she had on there, and should we do that?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I'll entertain a motion on this proposal.
I move that a favorable recommendation be forwarded to City Council concerning the proposed ordinance, amending Titles 10 and 11 of the City Code concerning the Development Review Committee.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Matt?
Now discussion.
Now discussion. Okay, thank you, Kurt.
All right. I have no other questions. So.
You have a question? No? Matt? Randy?
Regarding the amendment or other things?
Regarding the overall ordinance.
Okay.
Motion on the floor.
It's more just a question on the operating standards of how they're administered. I noticed they're on the website. So they're broken down by section. You only need to take the piece of it that you want.
Well, right now what's on the website is our application packets, which that's kind of this. That's what we have now, but this is something I'm formulating as an actual manual now. I haven't really decided on, or we haven't really decided on exact format exactly, because we haven't gotten that far.
If you show up at a pre-app and you're only doing a minor subdivision,
right,
you don't get this whole packet, do you?
Well, probably not. I mean, right now, the way it is we give them the packets of the specific type of applications they want. I haven't really thought about it too much. A little bit. I'm thinking kind of like, I think we might have both. We'll still have an application packet so that because not everybody needs this whole thing. I mean, like the conditional use thing is quite lengthy because there's so many different conditional uses with their different requirements. So I think we're going to my thought is we might just go ahead and have the manual because we have that. That's what's on record. That's the document that if we need to modify it or change it, that officially gets modified and changed. But for customer service purposes, I think we could have both and have the condensed application packet we have now. I mean, that's kind of my thought. And I certainly appreciate any feedback from you guys. But those are what we have on the website now, or the individual packets.
Well, I've seen checklists, 1 or 2 page checklist of items pertaining to the particular submittal that you're doing.
Yeah, and that's what we have now. Those application packets of the application form, they have kind of the same kind of narrative explaining the process, and then it has the checklist. Yeah.
Okay, that's all I have.
Thank you, Randy. Jen, anything? Dave?
First of all, Jen, given everything we ran you through on those 2 study sessions, I commend you for service above and beyond. You seem to have captured nearly everything that we raised, and that was a lot. There's always a but, you know that.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. But I have 1 quibble, 1 request, and 1 objection.
Okay.
The quibble and the request are really the same thing. I'm not an attorney, Kirsten, even though I appear to play one on television every other Monday. I think what the state statute says is, yes, architects have to be licensed by the state, and landscape architects have to be licensed by the state. I didn't see anything in the statute that says non-public projects with landscaping have to have a plan by a landscape architect. In any case, we've gotten around that by looking for the exemption. My only request is, right now it just says staff can grant exemptions. Doesn't give any criteria whatsoever, objective or otherwise. And as usual, my consistent theme is, if we're trying to improve on the process, we want to try and be objective, equitable, predictable. And right now we're not. We're still leaving it up to the fiat of staff instead of the fiat of DRC. I think that's a minor adjustment, and Craig probably might be able to come up with a couple of reasonable criteria that could help. That's not the part of projects I tend to deal with, but I'd like to see at least an attempt made to establish some kind of objective criteria. My objection is overall. By my count, we've deleted about 30 pages of the ordinance. We've substituted 125 pages of operating standards. If the intention that first arose in discussions with the public over the town plan 3 years ago was to clarify, objectify, simplify, make it easier to get through the process, make it easier to understand the process, we're about 100 pages off. So that's a concern. That's it.
Well, that's why I raised the question, do they get the whole book? I mean, is it kind of or can you just break it down into the particular submittal, so then you're only getting a couple pages?
Well, they can be that way. It's just, right now the application packets themselves don't have like the publication requirements, and there's some stuff that's still in the code right now that's not in the application packet, and certainly those things can be modified and added in to make a more comprehensive package for that person, but it's not they aren't necessarily getting this.
Right.
That wasn't my plan. My plan was to break it down.
In some ways, that's worse. Okay, we've taken 30 pages of information that's readily available in the public view of requirements in the zoning ordinance, and we replaced it with a 125-page document that is not only 4 times as much as what was in the ordinance in the first place, but now may not even be given to people as part of the normal packet. I find that of concern.
Is that, so let me understand that a little bit better, or the statement, if it's accurate or not. We did not, I believe, we did not take 30 out of one and replaced it with 125. The 125 was the 30 from here or some version of that, and pieces of information that were in other areas, and just put it all in one place. So it's not that 30 turned into 125. It was 30 here, 20 there, 50 there, but now at least it's accessible all in one place.
Right.
All that shows in here is 30 pages worth of deletions from the zoning ordinance. What shows here is 125 pages of operating standards. That's a substitution. Whether it's 2 pages here, 3 pages there, 10 lines there, it still amounts to a 4-to-1 transfer of information that was in the City Council approved ordinance and is now going to go into an administrative handbook for operating standards.
I think clarification, we're not actually recommending adoption of the operating standards as part of this. It would just be the ordinance itself, correct?
And the ordinance establishes the operating standards.
Right.
And these are the operating standards. This is the checklist of what goes in the application packets. This is the publication requirements, the recording requirements. This is information that it needs to be somewhere. It either needs to be here in the operating standards or it needs to be in the zoning code.
I don't believe that it's a matter of the number of pages. We're talking about customer service. The last time I've had to copy a printed zoning code was maybe 8 years ago. Most everything's online, and it should be. And so the idea, at least the way I saw it, was that we're trying to simplify what they're having to go through in terms of the code and the information, but also provide a convenient source of administrative information, and that it would be something that you could go to the website, and those who don't go to the website can come here or call and ask for it, and say, I'm doing a sketch plan. What do I need to do to get a sketch plan taken approved or submitted? And so they get a section of 3 or 4 pages of the operating, and they're referred to the appropriate section in the code, and then they're off doing their business. And so I guess I don't see it as how many pages are here and there as whether or not the process for the consumer has been improved. And I'm hoping that it is, and I'm hoping that by putting the submittal information into one place, it's probably a little longer because I think there's more narrative.
Yeah.
I think it helps to explain why you're doing what you're doing, and what if you don't do it, this happens, and maybe it's a little lengthier on paper because of different reasons. But it's whether or not the information is easier and more understandable.
Okay. And as I understand it, the operating standards are still in draft form.
They're still in draft form,
Still
very
being
much.
worked on. It will enable them to serve as that sort of guidebook for development and land use changes. So, okay. Any other questions? Do we want to propose any amendments based on what we've discussed today?
So do I need to make a motion
time-
to amend it?
Her suggestion, she needs to, I
Yes.
think, make a...
Perhaps you could read back your understanding of what we discussed.
I believe you were looking at the proposed section F of 1019, and adding language that would specifically allow any time extension that's beyond a one-year administrative approval to go before Planning Commission for an additional time extension of a year for conditional use permits and plan development overlays, with the same ability of going to council for a one-year additional time extension for the PDs and the rezonings, and then that same language for the plats, but that would go into the appropriate section in the subdivision code changes. That's what
Okay.
I understand.
Okay.
That's
Is
right.
that consistent? Would you like to make a motion on that as to amend it? You don't have to read it all back. I think we know what it is.
I make a motion, I make a motion to amend section 10-1-9,
F.
F.
Accordingly. Have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on that amendment before we vote on it? Okay. Call the question. All in favor? That would be unanimous. Okay, we'll add that change. Then I want to go back to Commissioner Metcalf's suggestion, I guess, on the landscape plan. And just reading through that, if there's any suggested changes, I guess the question or the concern would be that it be consistent with other licensed professionals that are addressed in the code. And I'm sure there's certain requirements for engineer stamps and so on. As I read this, it's consistent with state law. It's intended to be consistent with law. I guess I'm not.
That wasn't what I was addressing. That was the quibble. The request was, rather than just say staff may exempt properties, we need to give some kind of criteria, some kind of basis, some kind of.
We can work on that language because I understand what you're saying. The bottom line is that the architects have to be licensed, and if there's any exemption, it's not going to be exempting a licensed architect. It would be, Glenn, do you want to give your example of what you think? But we can work on the language and get it.
Yeah, and that really wasn't what I was concerned about. I understand. I think I understand if I were on staff, somebody came in and said, look, we have a little 3-foot deep and 8-foot long strip of planter out in front of our store, and we want to get rid of the dead grass and all that, and we're going to put in one small shrub and a couple of flowers. You don't need a landscape architect for that.
That's exactly what.
Right. Yeah. The question is how far into the gray area from a little tiny plot to something that should.
We will come back with.
And that's all I was looking for.
Okay.
I would agree with that. That it'd be nice to have a little bit of criteria and where that break point is.
Okay. Are there any other comments on the main motion, or should we go ahead and vote on that?
I'm just going to repeat what I said before. Regardless of the count of pages, if the intention was to simplify, if the intention was to make it more objective, then taking out 30 pages of requirements, substituting 125 pages of procedures, whether they're published or readily available or not, you're taking 30 pages of requirements in the code, in the ordinance, that would have to be changed by City Council, and substituting 125 pages of operating procedures that can be changed by staff. It doesn't take any legislative action. That is inconsistent with what we heard from the public over the last 4 years, inconsistent with the goals we set in the downtown plan, inconsistent with everything we've discussed in Planning Commission for the last 4.5 years. It's a concern. And I'm not sure how you scale 125 pages back to something that is, in fact, simplifying, clarifying, making things more objective. So I'm a little concerned about approving an ordinance change that ties us to operating standards that, in draft form or not, are still longer and more detailed and less objective than I'd like to see.
Unless I'm missing something, I'm looking at the purity of the ordinance itself being reduced by plus or minus 30 pages as simplifying the ordinance and making it more streamlined, as I have heard the public wants, the community wants. I do agree that the 125-page operating standard seems cumbersome, but I think that is being worked on. I think they've heard that concern. It needs to be consistent. It needs to be clear. It needs to be transparent, and it's no longer part of the ordinance. And I think the whole idea here was to get it out, get those details that don't belong in the law and the ordinance out. So I guess I don't respectfully agree.
Okay. Well, my concern is when I sign a contract, I don't usually sign it based on $10 plus other considerations to be specified by one party later on.
Understood. Anybody else? Should we call the question? Go ahead, Jan.
Well, there are some features with this operation manual that, like the sketch plan, that is something new. And so I think having that option is going to make it more flexible for people coming to the city. So there are some features about this new manual that I think are a positive shift. And I think most people are going to be accessing this online, and they're going to click right to their section. And so just as long as the staff directs and says, this is where you find it, then people can look only where they need to look. And the checklist format seems to be fairly user-friendly for someone who has their section to be able to know what's required and what's not. So there's, I think, some user-friendly features in this, even if there are some concerns with the length.
I think if I can just add some information, we really went into this to improve the process, and that was primarily driven by we've created this development review committee that's made up of 4 departments. It's kind of a bunch of information that really doesn't add to the process or to the benefit of the outcome. So that was really our goal. And so some of these other things, I don't think you can really equate number of pages to the length of the process or whether the process makes sense. So we did kind of get off on, because we created an operating standard, which was really meant for the Community Development Department, is kind of how we do business. It's not necessarily a public document. I think we're going to make it as simple and straightforward for the public as well. But it was a place to kind of move that stuff out of the ordinance that bogged down the ordinance and put it into just kind of how we do business. So I think ultimately when you look at the sketch plan, for instance, and the fact that we're eliminating the DRC and a lot of that responsibility now falls with the Community Development Department, I think you're going to have a smoother running ship. So I hope you could just focus on that, perhaps.
Well, I would agree that anytime you can eliminate an entire step, it's a win-win. It saves the client or the applicant money, time. It reduces staff time. And it was my understanding that the operating standards was primarily procedural, administrative kind of checklist items, and they weren't necessarily standards, guidelines that really have physical impact on the development or the design of a property. Those are maintained in a legislative document that could be enforced. We even put back some things in here because we wanted to have that enforcement. And so, it's a balance between what do you want to enforce, and then what can you just administer, because it's a checklist for how many drawings you need and what size sheet they are, and it doesn't have anything to do with bulk, height, density, traffic. So I think it's a good step.
Okay. Any other comments, thoughts? Matt?
I agree. I think it's a good step, and I'm also on side with Dave about sheer number of pages and trying to again speed it up. And the one thing I can recommend from a person who's been around this kind of thing is use technology to help you out. Publish it on a website, have links within the website, within a table of contents that'll take you right to your section, so you don't have to comb through 125 pages. So you can, on the content page, you can link right to where you need to. So if you only need to look at 5 pages, you're taken right to those 5 pages. I mean, I think if you take advantage of technology in that way, you can avoid a lot of the complaints for the people on the outside.
Okay. Thank you. Anything to add, Andrew?
I'm in complete agreement, and I view the breakup here as individual pamphlets. So if this is 30, this isn't 125, this is 10 sets of 12. That seems much more oriented, and then to labor that with an electronic component that guides you through it, I think is dead on with what we're trying to do.
Thank you.
Nice work.
Yeah, I'd like to second that, Jan. Great job pulling this together. Thank you. Shall we vote on it?
As amended?
As amended. All in favor? That would be 6-4 and 1 against. Commissioner Metcalf voting against. On to the rest of the agenda. Do we have any staff reports?
Mr. Chairman, there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about. One is Inspire Littleton. I think you had a great meeting at, let's see, where was that? That was Euclid Elementary School, for good comments on that. We also got a number of people that signed up that day. I think we had 30-some folks that signed up for Inspire Littleton. We also, last Wednesday, set up a booth for the Carousel of Music and got about 59 additional people. The whole cheerleading squad, I think, from Liberty High School, so definitely brought the average age down a little bit, so we may get some interesting comments showing up real soon. But also, I did want to mention that as a part of Western Welcome Week, this Saturday, there's going to be an event out on Main Street. We're going to be set up there with a booth. We'd certainly like some planning commissioners to be a part of that. We're kind of breaking it up because they really have pushed us to say you should be there from 8 to 5. So we've pretty much got the half a day covered, but if you're going to be down there anyhow, if you'd like to spend some time at the booth, and we're just doing 2 things. We're getting people to sign up for Inspire Littleton, and then I think we're asking kind of the ubiquitous question of how can you improve Littleton, something that simple. So if it sounds good, I've got Dennis's sign-up sheet. I'll take you down right now as far as what times you like
I
to
could do
participate.
8 to 9 if you want.
Oh, yeah, 8 to 9? Okay.
Glenn, I'll sign up, but I'll have to let you know what time. What are some of the times that you have gaps?
Well, we basically have got 4 shifts. We're kind of looking at 8 to 10, 10 to 12, 12 to 2.
12 to 2.
And then 2 to the end, which is like 4 o'clock, I believe.
Is Saturday what is the event?
The parade.
The parade, okay.
Yeah, Festival Day. We're going to be set up on the south side of the street between Bega Park and Prince. So we should be in the shade the first half of the day.
I'll show up at 10.
10 o'clock?
Beat me to it.
Excellent.
I had to speak up. Didn't want to do 2 o'clock.
And I can stay a little bit past 9. I have no problem with that. I just thought you were taking it by the hour. So
What time is the parade over?
11:30 usually.
By noon?
Officially, 12 to noon,
It's
or 10 to noon.
election year, so it'll be a little bit longer.
What a cynic.
A lot of
Yeah,
waving.
I'll let you know.
Okay.
But I'll definitely.
I'll be
And
in
we
there.
can send you out an email as a reminder, and
Yeah.
you look at your calendar and get back to us. That'd be great.
Yeah, I'll be available as well, just whenever you need
Okay,
somebody to fill in.
excellent.
I had a question. I'll be out of town, but I was curious if you'll end up putting out the roll of paper and having people be able to write comments or kids draw pictures, if that would be something else that would be part of it. With a lot of families coming downtown with the parade, that there's a likelihood that could be seems like that's been a nice interactive piece when we've done it at the schools. So I was just curious if there was any plans
I think we could do that.
to do that as well.
Sure.
Great.
Without your guidance, I'm not sure.
Oh,
But
you
we will
guys.
try, we'll try and
Pretty-
do it.
Pretty, since we've got the setup, so
I think if you give away popsicles, that'll help too.
Popsicles? Yeah. We do have the beach balls, so we do give those away, and kids do, they just flock to our thing with the beach balls, so.
Yeah, but you can't eat those.
Cannot eat.
Although they do taste something similar to the pizza later in the evening, so.
It's, yeah, same consistency.
So I have a question on Inspire Littleton, Glenn, and maybe it's one that Dennis needs to answer, but you know how it says when there's an idea that's up there and it says referred to the comp plan process or something else, does that automatically go on every idea, or are they discern somehow?
No, I think we actually put a response. We actually do that on staff, and it's something along the lines of will be considered in the comp plan process or something, or referred to the appropriate agency.
Okay.
Yeah, we actually do that. We do a response in the back end of the.
And that's just a statement that's put on there when an item is taken off the active list, so you're reassuring everybody it hasn't been
We haven't forgotten it.
evaporated or disappeared.
Well, it seems like the statement goes on it as soon as it goes up. I mean, some of the ideas are posted one day, and later that day or the next day, there's that statement that it's been referred to the comp plan process.
We might have, and I think the consultant said we've been kind of remiss in giving feedback. And I think the idea is that it's an interaction, that somebody's listening. I think we started out saying we're listening. So if somebody doesn't get any feedback on these ideas, they don't know that they're listening. Now, maybe we've overused a certain number of statements, and we should make it a bit more personal.
That's my sense, is when I see that, I almost feel like that idea is closed
been
off and it's
dismissed.
on to the next one, and that it might discourage additional building on that idea or feedback.
We might go back and look. I thought the only time I'd seen that pop up is when an item has actually been taken off the active list. Everyone gets an email notice saying this item has been da-da-da-da-da-da. You can click on the link and go to it, and then it has that summary. And then it no longer shows up on the active list. I haven't seen it applied to an item that's still actively entertaining seconds and comments.
Yeah, I think more recently it has gone on.
Maybe
them,
somebody's
as soon as
slipping.
the idea is up there. So I think, at least allow some time for it to generate additional comments before it feels like it's closed off for comment.
Right.
Potentially have this idea has been referred to the powers that be. Click here to add an additional comment, which would open up another window for maybe just that individual that would want to say something there. One. Two, I don't think most laymen, in fact, for myself, 4 months ago, had ever heard of a comp plan. And so to refer to it in, lack of another term, technical jargon, is off-putting at some level. If there could be some link where it says comp plan and make it hyperlink to a definition of what a comp plan is, put in plain English, a tool that we're using to develop a long-range planning strategy or vision for the city of Littleton so that we can make this the greatest place ever in the history of the world. Amen. Something that elaborates that so that the common user can see it and get it.
That's a good point. We do fall into the jargon easily.
Okay.
Secondly, I think Doreen wanted me to remind you of the APA conference, and our deadline for is this week. So if you want us to register you, please give us that information.
I thought it was the 3rd.
Well, I think there's
The 6th is when I wanted everything so that the 6th is when I wanted everything so I could get everybody's registrations in and that as early as possible.
So we got a little bit of a reprieve.
So I
then.
gave you a reprieve. I said, since
Thank
we're
you, Doreen.
meeting tonight, let's just do it tonight.
Okay. And remind us of the dates of that. Do you have those? It's in
October 3rd and to 6th, I believe it is.
It's in Snowmass.
I think so. I didn't bring that with me.
Okay. Anything else, Glenn?
no, sir.
Okay. Any reports from the commissioners? I have reports from the chair. I guess the only thing I'd like to add is that, and I know Glenn was there too, and you might be able to fill in a little bit. We went, unfortunately, weren't able to attend this last Inspire Littleton meeting because there was an economic development forum that was really pretty upbeat and informative. It was, it hosted the mayor of Denver, Mayor Hancock, and several of the economic development folks that are working at both the regional and the city and county of Denver level. Mayor Brinkman was involved in the discussion facilitating it, and a number of the leaders in the city of Englewood, Sheridan, Greenwood Village, some of the other surrounding communities were here. So it was sort of come together in a sort of a regional way, talking about economic development incentives that are happening regionally and locally. So it was very enlightening, very positive. It sounds like good things are happening in this part of the metropolitan area. So I don't know if there's anything you can add. I have some notes, but I didn't bring them with me.
No, that was good. And one thing I did want to mention, and I realize that we're not really keeping the Planning Commission up to date, but the council is going through this education process on economic development. Last Tuesday, they had the mayor and city manager of Lakewood that talked about the Belmar redevelopment experience and talked about that. That was very interesting. If you're, but once I kind of find out kind of late too, but once we know that schedule, I do know they have the city of, I'm not sure which, but they're really talking about community development from a standpoint of neighborhood outreach and code enforcement. That's coming up in September as well, not really related so much to economic development, but still related to planning as well. So when I get the details on that, I'll try and get that out to you as much. If you want to watch it or come down and come to the meeting, it's usually very
Are they
interesting.
open to the public, and are they posted on the website?
They should be, yes. They should be on the website. They have to post it as an agenda item. So it would be there, but you wouldn't know to look, I guess. But it certainly relates to what Planning Commission does, so.
Yeah, I'd appreciate the schedule. Just related to that, I was reading an article, and I don't remember it was in the Independent or the Littleton paper that's distributed by the city, but that talked about how Inglewood and Littleton were considering a partnership on fire departments. Mm-hmm. And I was just curious if there's any other, beyond the fire department, if there's any other developments in that direction, or if it's just limited to that. Do you know?
As far as joint use of facilities and...
Yeah, I mean, probably for economies of scale, or, you know.
That's the only one I'm aware of.
Okay.
The whole just continuing on these discussions, so there's a lot of discussion around Chatfield Reservoir. Is that something that at any point in time would come in front of the Planning Commission? Does that fall under our purview? Mm-hmm. No, right?
No.
You're talking about the raising of the water level?
Yeah.
Our firm actually is one of the shortlisted firms to do the work or do the design. It's a federal project, Corps of Engineers.
Just has local implications. I've got one more question. Glenn, Dennis presented a whole bunch of really good information at the July 24th forum at Euclid, and there were copies going around. I know I didn't get a copy. Could we get that to the Planning Commission?
Yeah. Was it the actual presentation?
Did somebody get a copy of it? Jenny, you were there.
Is there a handout?
Well, there were handouts going around, so I presume it was the same information about economic development, retail, employment, that sort of thing that he was putting up on the board.
Okay.
But I found it very enlightening, and it'd be nice to have a copy of it.
Sure.
I would yes and exactly what Dave just said, and to all of the meetings. There's a whole bunch of great statistics and great information that we see once and then disappears. It would be great to have all that summarized as sort of a state of the state data set that we could look for, state of the city data set.
Right. Yeah, and I think we're actually going to kind of have a capstone. That's what we're kind of holding that last meeting in September. So we kind of give an overview of all that information in that last meeting and hopefully generate then some ideas from those who attend that meeting after they see everything.
But I do agree that if it's available, if it's being distributed at the meetings, if we could just get copies of it so we can digest it even before that capstone. So I think that would be helpful.
Right. Yeah, I'd want to be one ahead.
Yeah.
And given that at those public forums, it's not necessarily our place to speak. We're not shut off from speaking, but we're wearing our citizen hat, not planning hat, just to have it, just to be one ahead. So when the comments come in, we at least can process the third thought in our head, not the first thought in our head, about how we might want to address that.
Okay.
One other comment about that one meeting in particular was in two separate classrooms, that there was an air conditioner going on in the back room, and at least 3 people got up and walked out because they couldn't hear a thing Dennis was saying. If we have a portable microphone, or if the other room is a little easier to hear from, that would be a lot better. So maybe for the next meeting over at Goddard.
All right. We do have such a thing.
Be a good idea.
There was a lot of engagement of the maps that were on the boards, and there were a lot of dots and things like that. So how do we see that, or what are we doing with that information? How is that being summarized in any way?
I didn't actually see that. We don't lose that. We keep all those things, even the rolls of paper that Jenny was talking about. So that will all be compressed into some form so that you can see it all in one piece.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure. Even the Inspire Littleton, we actually have started a list and are hoping to actually have an intern come in and work on all the ideas that come out of Inspire Littleton and group them by subject idea. So it's not just things that are thrown out there and forgotten. They are going to kind of fit into a form that we'll provide to you.
Okay. Any other thoughts, comments, Randy? Sounds like you
A
guys.
couple meetings ago, there was mention of Dr. Cog's Urban Center. Are we applying for that or talking to Dr. Cog about that?
Their deadline we actually missed. So yes, we intended to, and there will be another one in January. So that's our goal, to hit that one.
Is the goal to get grant money?
Yes.
Okay.
CMAQ money, you bet. It's one of the many goals, I
Yes.
guess. But certainly on the top of the list.
Okay. All right. If there's nothing else, do I have a motion to adjourn?